Everyone to Max and Stacy's Space with Jimmy Song. I'm Jethro Toro, co-hosting from Bitcoin Beach right now, and Stacy asked me to kick off this conversation by describing the event that brings us all together today. Bitcoin Histórico is the inaugural conference hosted by El Salvador's Bitcoin office in the historic district on November 12th and 13th at this pivotal moment in economic history. Hosted just outside President Bukele's National Palace, Bitcoin Histórico is a two-day event with Philosopher King meets Renaissance 2.0 vibes, featuring high-level philosophical conversations rather than corporate pitches. It's the cornerstone event of Bitcoin Month, but it takes 2 full weeks to properly experience the transformation here in El Salvador, so there are more events as well. Adopting Bitcoin is November 14th and 15th, the 2 days after Histórico, and it's been the heartbeat of Bitcoin events in Bitcoin country for 5 years running now. After that, come on down here to Bitcoin Beach to explore the circular economy that inspired the world and to witness the economic boom that's happened rapidly throughout the Surf City area. The following weekend, after your beach vacation, come on up to Bitcoin Berlin Circular Economy and Coffee Country with cool, refreshing mountain air and the Economy of Bitcoin Summit in one of the most hyper-Bitcoinized places on Earth. The full experience all starts, though, with Bitcoin Histórico on November 12th and 13th, the cornerstone event that brings us together for Max and Stacy's Space today. And without further ado, here's Stacy to introduce today's conversation.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our space, the Bitcoin Histórico space with Jimmy Song. Jimmy is so important to everything I have done at the Bitcoin office in terms of education. Many of you may have already heard or know about Kuba Plus, which is our Bitcoin and Lightning Devs program. And we do that we've worked with Giacomo Zucco and Plan B Network on that over the past 3 years. But before that, there was Jimmy Song 7. The Jimmy Song 7, wow. Jimmy had been to El Salvador quite a few times, and we met up in January of 2022. And I asked him if he could come help me with training some Salvadorans how to participate in this renaissance that I believed was going to be happening thanks to Bitcoin being adopted as legal tender by President Bukele for El Salvador. And so he readily accepted the offer, for me to bring him over and teach some of our students. And he worked so hard to, pick the very best and brightest of El Salvador. And we found 7 of them, including Mario Flamenco, who has since joined me at the Bitcoin office and is now even the director of the National AI Agency. This is how good Jimmy Song is as a teacher. I credit him with everything. Jimmy, welcome to our space here, and we're really looking forward to welcoming you back to El Salvador, probably like the 6th or 7th time by now, on November 12th and 13th.
Well, Stacy, you're like giving me way too much credit. You have to understand, Stacy organized all of this, found the scholarships, gave me all the people to actually evaluate and so on. It wasn't me, and it was mostly Stacy, honestly, and Max doing all of the recruiting and getting the program set up, giving me the venue, like. I just kind of had to show up and teach, really, and maybe evaluate a few scholarship applications. It wasn't quite kind of nearly the heavy lift that Stacy makes it seem like that I did. But that said, I was super excited to get involved in doing all of the training of Salvadoran developers. You put out a call like that, and you're always like curious about who kind of shows up to these things. And that first cohort was very interesting. And I got to teach a second cohort like maybe a year later. And that was also very interesting. I believe a lot of those students are now part of the Salvadoran Bitcoin economy in some way, shape, or form. So it's as a teacher, that's always very rewarding to get to see the fruits of your labor, and it's especially nice when the students are enthusiastic about learning, as these students were, and that was it's especially fun. I still remember like I had a problem up on one of those times, and I said, okay, first one to solve this. I just took out $100 bill. It's like, first one to solve this gets this, and it was it's not the sort of thing that most teachers can sort of get away with, but I got to do it, and it definitely motivated the students. So that's what I remember.
Well, you motivated me quite a lot too, because that experience, I guess I didn't really understand what I was getting into when I asked you to come to El Salvador and teach our students. I didn't realize that it would consume so much of my life for the next 3 or 4 years. And more than anybody, Jimmy, like just how much I do on the education front. But that first experience and seeing the transformation, and that was a 3-day program that you did with a programming Bitcoin with us, first Jimmy Song 7. But you said at that dinner, I remember we also had dinner at the end of it, the end of the 3 days, you, me, and Max at Il Bon Gustayo, and they were so amazed by Jimmy's song, I have to say, because Jimmy had like 2 steaks, a lamb, and a salmon, and when you ordered like the salmon, they were like, "Is this guy," like, they came over and whispered to me, "Are you sure he really wants to eat all of this?" And I'm like, "Yep, he likes his protein, he likes his meat." So, but that you said at that dinner that if I could train 20 of these students to Bitcoin dev level, like to be good enough for the Jimmy Song course, that we could transform the economy. And here we had only 7, and 2 of them were actually from Puerto Rico. So I was like, wow, so I need 15 more at least. And that set me on a mission of finding another 15 and expanding the program into something bigger than just 3 days. And that led me a few months later, in November of that year, when I was in Lugano and I met with Folger Ventures. And they're the ones that came in and said, let's expand this. We'll make it bigger. We'll create Kubo Plus, it became, and brought in Giacomo Zucco to do like a several months long program. And that has led me to all these other education programs, including one with Lena Seish for our 7, 8, 9-year-olds in the public schools in El Salvador that rolls out in January. We're teaching 7-year-olds like what is money. That's the name of the actual program. So it all started with you, Jimmy, though.
Well, I'm grateful to have known you guys, and like sort of fortuitously, seeing you like when I first came in January of 2022. Just came to like see what the place was, and there you guys were, like sitting, I think, at Bitcoin Beach, and I was like, hey, you guys were here. I had no idea. Yeah, it's been a cool journey for me too, and it's always fun like going back to El Salvador and seeing just like what new stuff is there, like, oh, there's a new bike lane, or there's a new building, or there's a, that's a new road, or that's an amusement park, or whatever. And it's just, I'm always amazed at the degree to which development sort of accelerates when you have sort of like the right leadership, the right model, the right system, and that's a testament, honestly, to Nayib Bukele's leadership and what he's done in the country, and it's honestly like pretty amazing to see, and I can't wait to come back and see what else you guys have to show me, because every time I go back, you're like, hey, let's go to this new restaurant. It's like, where like it's new to me. You guys have been going there for like 3 months or something, but it's like, oh, okay, wow, they have Argentinian steak now. That's awesome. Or that's a building that, and they have like fresh sashimi or something. It's like, oh, okay, like this it's pretty nice.
Don't trust, verify. I mean, you were really the first to really do that. That was really important, because that Jimmy Song 7 program was at like the end of June, early July of 2022. By the time we had we had interviewed, remember, like 150 students and got them down to the 7 best. And at that time, that was the beginning of the war against the gangs. And some of the media, a lot of the media in the US and the Biden administration, and some Bitcoiners were like, oh, saying the D word, the dictator word, and all that stuff. But you came down there and you saw for yourself the liberation. You saw the beginning of trust returning to the society, because I remember you went on a Bitcoin Magazine podcast to talk about what you were had observed with your own two eyes in El Salvador just 3 months into the war against gangs, and you saw the return of trust. You saw that the shutters started to come down on the restaurants that had basically, there were no outdoor restaurants, right? You couldn't sit outdoors. Everything was shuttered up because people were afraid to get mugged or robbery. The wire, the barbed wire around all the properties was still up. You saw that, but it was starting to come down. And Jimmy, when you come back, you'll see that it's almost entirely gone now. All that barbed wire that you noted, that's coming down.
Yeah, it's funny because I was observing, like I went to a CrossFit class and I had to run by something and I was like, hey, there's barbed wire here. I was like, oh, is it? I think that might be new. I'm not really even sure, but you notice these things as some of these U.S. places get a little worse. That they put bars in their windows and barbed wire in their fences and things like that.
So Max, you were observing all of this as we were doing this. You're in those photos from the Jimmy Song 7 class. And in fact, that where we held that class, by the way, Jimmy, is now the Bitcoin office. Like, we use that as my office. I really love that space. I'm so fond of it. And in fact, it was part of President Bukele ran part of his campaign out of that space. I did not realize that at the time when we held the Jimmy Song 7 course there, but it is so historic for the transformation of El Salvador, because he did run his first campaign in 2019 for the presidency in 2019 out of that office. So Max got to see it and see the Jimmy Stacy transformation on the education front.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's great that Jimmy's going to be at Bitcoin Histórico. Going back 15 years or so, we've known Jimmy Song for almost that entire time. And it's always been a return to Bitcoin roots and what Bitcoin represents in its primary use case and value proposition, which of course is self-sovereignty and hodling. And throughout the last 15 years, the path of Bitcoin, there's been detours, right? There's detours into altcoins, into ICOs. I think there's a little bit over corporatization at the moment into these Bitcoin treasuries, et cetera. And it's important to get back to that old time religion, get back to the original mission of Bitcoin. So I know Jimmy is always on point when it comes to talking about what the primary purpose of Bitcoin is. So seeing him at Bitcoin Histórico is going to be fantastic. And yeah, the education, that was the first stop, really. We were figuring out who to call. And Jimmy Song's name was the first we came up with. And then Stacy put out a call to the entire nation. Every single school in the nation was contacted about the opportunity to learn Bitcoin programming. And we ended up, I guess, with the Jimmy Song 7. And then that was the kernel around which this whole education program has developed. And it has been phenomenally successful and is now the benchmark for other countries, and other cities are contacting Bitcoin office and saying, how do we get some of these educational materials? And of course, they're all open source. And that's just a fantastic part of the Bitcoin country story, for sure.
And that's something I'm excited about. I did record like the very last session of my course, and I gave it to the Kubo Plus people, and it's now open source. There's like lectures that you can watch, and they have it all online, so you don't have to necessarily take it from me. And I've encouraged a lot of the people that have taken my course to go out and try to teach it. I think it would be great if we can get more Bitcoin developers, especially in places like El Salvador. So super excited about that. But, I have to give you guys credit, Max and Stacy, because, the trend that I've seen all over the world is that you get some Bitcoin enthusiasm. It always starts with a Bitcoin meetup. But then you get the altcoiners that come in, and almost always, you get an altcoin hysteria that happens at all of these places. And oftentimes they overtake Bitcoiners for a time, although they always crash. So the Bitcoiners end up making a comeback. But El Salvador did not go through that. And that's something that I've always appreciated about El Salvador. You prevented the CZs of the world from having too much influence. And I can tell you, I've been all over the world. Like, there's so many places where CZ essentially comes in and like meets with like the prime minister or something, and then he gets like a foothold and puts his altcoin casino into that country, and they lose a lot of money and he makes a lot of money, and it's really kind of a tragic tale, because most of these places could use the savings technology that is Bitcoin, but instead a lot of people get led down the road of gambling and risk taking and things like that, and you have a few winners, but a vast majority of people that get into altcoins end up losing. So really appreciate that about El Salvador, and that's why I think this conference emphasizing Bitcoin and not all of this other crap that almost every other place inevitably ends up doing is going to be important. And I like the fact that this conference is going to be focused, I think, much more in the long term. Like when you're talking about Philosopher King or Renaissance or something like that, you're not really thinking about like, oh, what's the price this week or something like that, or hey, here's a pricing model, and we need to talk about that. It's really more about the culture and more about permanent, long-lasting transformation of a society. And I'm not exactly sure what to expect, but if you guys, the way Stacy and Max sold me on this is, we want this to be sort of like an elevated version, right? Like this isn't going to be a conference where hey, here's this new, I don't know, like wallet or something like that. There's plenty of technical conferences where you can talk about development. There's plenty of conferences where you're going to talk about altcoins or whatever. And there's even now a lot of conferences on the financial end, right? Like, oh, here's a treasury company, and here's how they're going to figure out how to accumulate more Bitcoin and provide value to shareholders or something like that. This feels just very different, right? It's at another level. It's looking at the next 10 to 20 years, not just from a financial perspective, but from a cultural and almost spiritual perspective of, hey, how are we going to actually change things, right? How is, like, we know that Bitcoin is going to be a significant part of the future, but what obligations does that put us in? How are we going to make sure that this is a force of good? Because despite Bitcoin being a very good thing, there are people that use it in a way that's not necessarily great, right? Like they're leveraging things and creating kind of scams of different kinds and things like that. So I'm really interested in being at this conference and learning more about the vision, I think, and sort of contributing to that vision of the future that I think will be really interesting to like actually get together and think about. It's maybe something that I talk about with my friends like once in a while, but having a whole conference about it and thinking about what Bitcoin looks like 20 years from now and how society has organized around it. And what the vision of an entire country might be. That's not something that I think we've really explored in Bitcoin, and I'm excited about.
Wow, that was truly one of the most remarkable monologues I've ever heard. Like, that was so beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And it really does mean a lot coming from you. And yes, this is a celebration of El Salvador and of Bitcoin and how you can just do things. Like, you can do amazing things in a moral way, in an ethical way. Like, you could, and it actually has to be. I think if you're building something for the long term that you want to last for hundreds of years. When I first met President Bukele in person, and Max and I hung out with him for like 3.5 hours, just the three of us, I realized like, this could be a 1 in 500 year sort of leader. That this wasn't just, a good politician. This was a great leader. And it made it easy for me to fight for El Salvador, because this was even before the war on gangs, even before he had secured the peace, the peace and liberation for the people. I just knew he could do something like that. I knew he could be extraordinary, and El Salvador had a chance to be extraordinary. And look how far it has come. Like, Jimmy, when you were there in January 2022, that was when gangs still occupied huge parts of the country. Soyapango, Ilopango, Apopa, like, those were still like controlled by these gangs, and now they're gone. And now those people that live there under this oppression have been liberated. And I think what we want to achieve with Bitcoin Historico is this sense that, we're all in this together, and that strong men can create good times, right? And in that, I mean humans, right? We can create good times, especially with hard money. I think that it brings out the goodness in those who are good and those who are strong, because it is hard money. It is low time preference. It does force you to think about the future. And if you're strong and can endure all those temptations that you talk about, Jimmy, of like people getting sidetracked by altcoins and Lambos and short-term thinking, I think we could build something extraordinary in El Salvador, and I think we are, and that's why we have stayed so good. And Jimmy, I think you also know how hard it's been. Most people don't really understand what we've had to do to keep this so Bitcoin only, so Bitcoin maximalist, and so high integrity and very high standards. And once other countries started to quote unquote adopt Bitcoin, and actually they adopted crypto, I think it's really made it so clear to the world what we've actually built in El Salvador.
Yeah, and that's I kind of liken it to the American Revolution. It was like sort of a very deep experiment, right? Like and a lot of people didn't know whether it was going to work and so on. And what happened afterwards is that as other countries saw the success of the United States, they started taking on a lot of the forms. So we saw that for like by I think maybe like 1935 or something like that. A large number, I think, especially post World War I, we saw that a large number of countries had taken on that form. And that, not to say that like the U.S. democracy was perfect or anything like that, but it set sort of like a standard, and it made it sort of something that people can look to and say, okay, well that's working, and we should definitely imitate that because we want to have what they have. And I'd like to, and this is kind of a similar experiment because there's an economy here, there's a whole country here, and there's obviously Bitcoin is a big part of it, and we get to we get to see it as it evolves, right? Like as where the country is sort of like figuring things out, and seeing a lot of the prosperity, a lot of the goodness, and I think I saw like a poll or something, or something about him being Nayib Bukele being like one of the most popular leaders in Central America. Like he would like win elections probably in like neighboring countries and so on. Like that's like indicative, I think, of the experiment that's running in El Salvador. And who knows, like in 20 years you may see a lot of other countries that are imitating El Salvador and saying, okay, well, that it's worked for them. We've tried this shitcoin stuff and it didn't work, but they obviously know something, and it's working over there and they have prosperity. How can we imitate it? So for me, like this is it's a very important experiment, because a lot of other people are watching this country very closely. I mean, certainly Bitcoiners, but even outside of Bitcoin, there's a lot of countries that are saying, hey, like let's see how that works, and let's see if this is the right way to go. I saw a tweet from Bukele about like taking out corrupt judges and stuff, and we're kind of living through that in the U.S. right now, where a lot of these judges like are just saying, okay, well, you have to do what we say, and you wonder about like the checks and balances, because in many ways, like the judicial system is extremely difficult to put a check on, because it's just so slow and so on. So there's a lot of that I'm like, it's El Salvador has a lot of global importance in that regard. It's probably going to be a model for the future for a lot of other countries, certainly small ones, but maybe even bigger ones, where they'll be looking and saying, okay, well, how do the way that people say, how do we become the next Singapore? A lot of other countries are saying, how do we become the next El Salvador? How do we clean up the streets? How do we make things safe? How do we bring prosperity? How do we get investment and things like that? And not to say that everything's perfect, but there's a lot of progress, and that's the important and interesting thing that we're seeing here. And I at some point, historians are going to look back and say, okay, well, here's how the various things went together, and perhaps you'll see that Bitcoin had a big part to do with it.